Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today, wherever you are. We will be getting started shortly. In the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat to the side, your name, your organization, and or location. Welcome. In addition, while we wait, we have a poll just to see also where people are coming from and your experience in Caribbean response. So we welcome you to take that poll. We'll just be getting started in a few minutes. Great. I think we'll get started now. Thank you again for joining. My name is Lynn Yoshikawa, Regional Representative for CaLP's Americas Office. We're delighted to have you join us for our first report launch on the Caribbean. We're honored to have Ms. Andrea Grosvenor, Acting Deputy Executive Director of CDEMA, join us today, as well as other experts and participants from across the region. I know we have participants from Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, the Cayman Islands and the Virgin Islands, as well as from government and local organizations. We realize that CaLP is very new to this complex region, so we hope we can add value to your efforts as you consider cash and voucher assistance in emergency response, and we look forward to further collaboration and partnership. We acknowledge that we don't have many national actors in today's webinar due to the demands of the ongoing COVID-19 response, but we hope that colleagues from the region actively share and participate in the discussion today. Last but not least, we want to thank USAID for funding the study and webinar, which does not necessarily reflect the views of USAID or the government. Now for background, we embarked on this desk review a few months ago to contribute to learning in the region and to help guide CaLP's work to see how and where we can add most value. In terms of humanitarian cash and voucher assistance, or CVA, as we call it in CaLP, has been used in the Caribbean since at least 2004 in response to Hurricane Ivan. Since then, it has been used to respond to the emergency and recovery needs in various disasters. Most notably, CVA, linked to social protection systems in the British Virgin Islands and Dominica, emerged as a prominent response tool in hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017. The 2017 response catalyzed a rethink in approaches from international aid actors with a strong focus on shock responsive social protection. Due to the nature of social protection programming, however, there's also been renewed attention to ensure that the needs of migrants, refugees, and other vulnerable groups are addressed. Today, with the COVID-19 pandemic response and restrictions, CVA continues to be highly relevant to address the wide economic impacts of the crisis. Now, if we could turn to the next slide. Before introducing our speakers, I wanted to share some brief housekeeping points. So first, the webinar will be 1 hour. Please submit any questions in the any questions to the Q&A box. Now that's on your toolbar on the right, and any general comments to the chat, which is more to the left on the toolbar. In the Q&A session, we will allow people to speak. So please make sure to change your name to show your name and organization and raise your hand. And that will help us unmute your microphone. And then the webinar will be recorded, is being recorded, and the recording will be shared to the CaLP website, the D groups, and with all of you as participants for your background. And then we're pleased to share the poll results. We're glad to see that we have a large, about a third of the group participants are from the Caribbean region. Secondly, we have another third of the group participating from Europe as well. And then even colleagues from Africa, South America, Central America, and even the Asia Pacific, which is fantastic. And we also have the majority of participants have been involved in disaster response at 55%. So we're here to learn from all of you as well today. Thank you. Great. Now I will just quickly introduce the speakers. We're delighted to have Ms. Andrea Grosvenor from CDEMA with us to provide opening remarks to today's discussion. Ms. Elizabeth Riley, Acting Executive Director for CDEMA, had an urgent meeting, and we're very grateful to have Ms. Grosvenor join us to share CDEMA's perspective. She brings over 2 decades of experience in disaster management, ranging from disaster preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery. And she has guided the development of CDEMA's DRR and climate change adaptation products, and has been involved in coordinating regional response during emergencies. We also have 3 speakers who will reflect on different aspects of the report findings. Alan Grundy, Technical Advisor for Cash Transfer Programming with Catholic Relief Services, will speak to how CRS has repositioned itself and navigated the financial service provider landscape in the Caribbean. Alan has extensive experience in emergency response and recovery with a focus on cash, digital financing, sustainable resource management, livelihood recovery, and disaster resilience. Next, Justin Colvard, Mercy Corps Haiti's Country Director, will speak to the organization's successes and challenges co-leading the Cash Working Group in Haiti. Justin is a public health and development professional with nearly a decade of experience in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. And then we have Sarah Bailey, Director of Program for WFP Barbados Office, supporting Caribbean preparedness and response. Sarah will be discussing WFP's approach in the region to working with CVA as a social protection tool in close collaboration with governments. Sarah has over 15 years of experience researching, evaluating, and managing humanitarian programs, and she has expertise in CVA and the intersection of social protection with disaster management. And then last but not least, I'm pleased to have Zara Rizvi, independent consultant who led the study, co-moderating the discussion with me today. Zara has been working with CASH for over 15 years and has worked in the Caribbean and with the Haiti earthquake response, and then with the 27 hurricane response. She was with the Ministry of Health and Social Development in the British Virgin Islands, and more recently with WFP to support the Hurricane Dorian response in the Bahamas. Our speakers will be sharing perspectives on some of the key themes that emerged from the briefing note, and then we welcome a conversation among the speakers and participants on the findings. In addition to those that the speakers will delve into, the briefing note, which was just launched yesterday, focuses on key technical aspects which are particularly relevant in the Caribbean context. For example, the review found that, unsurprisingly, localizing the response among national and regional authorities, civil society actors, and local organizations is a key way for international actors to add value, particularly given the very limited presence of aid agencies in most island states, and hence limited contextual knowledge and operational systems. Secondly, which Alan will be touching on this, but identifying financial service providers in a rapid response is a significant challenge due to the differing regulations across the states. Fourthly, the study also found that the usual humanitarian market assessments are often not necessary in many cases in the Caribbean because government market data is usually available and relatively robust. And secondly, because markets typically rebound, as this is a very high priority for government. Finally, we also touch on the issue of communication with communities. While this is acknowledged to be very important globally, I think one of the findings of the study is that given the often small and tight-knit communities in the Caribbean, this becomes ever more important. And finally, there was also a recommendation that there was a need for further evidence building. While there is extensive global evidence on CVA, there's relatively limited contextualized evidence to ensure local buy-in. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Andrea for opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A pleasant good morning to fellow panelists and participants who are joining us from various geographic regions. It is my distinct pleasure to offer reflections on behalf of Miss Elizabeth Riley, the Executive Director acting at this morning's launch. Winds of Change, Lessons and Recommendations on the Use of Cash and Voucher Assistance for the Caribbean Atlantic Hurricane Season, being convened by the Cash Learning Partnership. Ms. Riley certainly conveys her best wishes for a successful launch. The value of cash and voucher assistance within CDEMA participating states was tangibly demonstrated in the aftermath of hurricanes Irma and Maria, with successful examples implemented in states including the British Virgin Islands, Dominica, as well as in Antigua and Barbuda for the residents of Barbuda. As we convene today, globally, we are experiencing the most significant hazard impact in 100 years. Whilst the impacts have been felt within every nation across the globe, COVID-19 has acutely highlighted the vulnerabilities of small island developing states to external shocks. The impact across social and economic sectors has been significant, disrupting both lives and livelihoods. Indeed, 2 weeks before the official start of the 2020 hurricane season, the impact of COVID-19 has affected the livelihoods of all persons adversely. And this impact continues to radically shift the number of persons falling within these categories of the marginal and most vulnerable in all our states upwards, though not uniformly. Within the complex multi-hazard scenario being experienced in the Caribbean region, which includes the COVID-19 outbreak, the pending hurricane season, the ongoing drought, and livelihood disruption caused by COVID-19, the relevance of cash and voucher assistance increases 1,000-fold, since CVA, implemented in a culturally appropriate context, has the potential to positively impact the lives of those most severely affected. It is within this context, that the overall report findings on the need to have a strong understanding of the context in the design and delivery of CVA is certainly supported. As Benjamin Franklin said, out of adversity comes opportunity. And for CDEMA, COVID-19 presents the opportunity to promote the rallying call of resilience, including a focus on preparedness at the local, national, and regional levels. Resilience defined as not just how we bounce back, but how to bounce forward in the aftermath of hazard impacts. It is useful to note that the Caribbean Resilience Framework adopted by the heads of government of the Caribbean community post the impact of Hurricanes Irma and Maria is instructive in the context of today's launch. It identifies 5 pillars. These are social protection for the marginal and most vulnerable, safeguarding infrastructure, enhancing economic opportunity, environmental protection, operational readiness and recovery. Adequate preparedness requires foresight, and as such, it will also be important for agencies supporting CVA to shift planning horizons from the familiar post-hurricane timeframes to the medium-term time horizons now associated with COVID-19 as we learn to live with this disease. As CDEMA reflected on the report, the need for stronger coordination and collaboration based on the value added brought by various actors and the needs to agree on common approaches and standards to cash and voucher assistance certainly resonated with our team. Consistent with this recommendation, I am pleased to indicate that with the support of UNICEF, that within the next 3 months, CDEMA will be leveraging its convening power to bring together key actors, including the Cash Learning Partnership and the World Food Programme, which support cash and voucher assistance to advance a common agenda. This report will be instrumental in shaping the discussions within that space and will inform the development of model guidelines identifying core elements for national level implementation of a sustainable shock responsive system. Robust cash and voucher assistance approaches which facilitate multiple actors addressing identified needs across the vulnerability spectrum must be rooted within a robust enabling environment which treats with policy, legislative considerations, and appropriate governance frameworks. This approach will provide the starting point for addressing pervasive challenges, including incomplete databases of social security beneficiaries and protocols for data sharing as identified in the report. In closing, allow me to extend CDEMA's congratulations to the Cash Learning Partnership on the launch of Winds of Change, Lessons and Recommendations on the Use of Cash Voucher Assistance for the Caribbean Atlantic Hurricane Season. CDEMA looks forward to engaging collaboratively with CaLP and the diversity of CVA actors in the region to strengthen the coordination and implementation approaches for the benefit of persons within our participating states. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for those kind words. I think you already raised many of the topics that will be coming up further in today's conversation related to preparedness, culturally appropriate CVA, which is where I think the CaLP network really needs to increase its learning. And just to answer a question about presentation, we have a very light on presentations today. We will be, we're trying to facilitate a conversation among actors, so please do bear with us. You'll be able to engage with some of the speakers through the presentations. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Alan Grundy from CRS to hear his some of his remarks and reflections on the report findings. Over to you, Alan.
Thanks, Lynn. Hi, everybody. Alan Grundy from CRS. So I'll be talking about 2 main points today. First is regarding CVA, on the need from moving on from awareness raising and focusing on implementation, specifically for the Caribbean region. And the next point would be around working with FSPs in the Caribbean. First, since 2017, CRS has been transitioning away from direct implementation in the region and more towards supporting local partners, kind of part of our localization strategy. As some of you may know, or all of you may know, that the Caribbean region has a lot of experience with CVA. Haiti is a country program, the response in Haiti is one of the kind of leading the charge on using cash. Additionally, we have the BVI in Dominica with the responses in Hurricanes Irma and Maria, which was some great learning around collaboration, some great experience there. And then we have Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, and Bahamas as some responses and ongoing cash programs. So the question on is cash appropriate, in my opinion, has been answered many times over. And so the recommendation that CRS has taken on and our strategy has been moving away from the software like awareness raising around preparedness on CVA and more focused towards implementation on the how-to, making up our partners operational and leading cash responses during a crisis. So primarily our strategy with CVA, with CRS in the Caribbean is supporting our partners in how to operationalize CVA programming in emergencies. The second point that I'd like to touch on now is regarding FSPs. For being the Caribbean region to be so small, the region itself is pretty complex and diverse. We have 13 sovereign nations or island nations, 12 dependent territories, multiple languages, approximate population for the region around 44 million. So recurring natural disasters. FSPs is financial service providers. I'll be talking about financial service providers. Thanks, Sarah. So the recurring natural disasters in the region, and there's a significant financial service provider infrastructure established in each of the countries, or in most of the countries. So very strong government regulations, strong central banks. So doing cash as a response in these countries is not an easy thing that you can just come in and do it. It requires a lot of negotiating and setting up and stuff. It takes a lot of investment. In terms of operational efficiency, it's not really cost efficient for organizations, international organizations, to have presence in all of the different countries and territories. That makes our capacity to respond very difficult if we don't have operational presence. So how can an agency such as CRS and other international agencies in the region, working in the region, how can we be cash ready? How can we respond to an emergency? Except for Haiti and other large islands, it's not really possible for international organizations to have a presence in all of the countries and be cash ready in all of the countries. So as it's traditionally designed, our capacity to respond is limited. Arriving to a country that we do not have a presence will require us to set up a financial service provider contract, to identify and set up a contract, which is a very slow process. It takes, to be compliant is a very slow process. To set up an office, it's very expensive. Hiring new staff, looking at location in an emergency is a very difficult operation or a operationally heavy process to do. A registration with the government is difficult, it's slow also. So be able to be operational in a country that we don't have physical presence in takes time. And also something very finance specific, bringing money into the country is also very difficult, and it takes a lot of operational burden. So there's really, for international organizations, there's really only two options. The first is partnerships. We really have to collaborate with our local partners, looking to establish partnerships with local agencies that have presence on the ground is really the most cost-efficient way to go forward. CRS has a program called Empower that primarily works on building these relationships with local partners to be able to respond in emergencies. Our focus is on building strong relationships and designing responses prior to an emergency. We really believe that it's important to do this work before an emergency, because figuring out how to have a relationship during an emergency is very difficult. The second point is collaboration. The CCD, the Collaborative Cash Delivery Network, is working on promoting collaboration between international NGOs and local NGOs, or INGOs and NGOs, establishing that link between the strengths that the international NGOs have and the strengths that local NGOs have, and be able to do a cash response in a collaborative manner. So that's one of the main options, right? Is figuring out partnerships and establish a collaborative strategy to respond in emergency. The second option, in cases where there is no possibility to establish a collaborative model, the second option to respond with cash in a place where there is no collaboration, where you don't have a partner on the ground, is looking to establish or work through cross-border payments. So what are these? These are what CRS, we started up this initiative called the Global Payment Solution, the GPS, where we've contracted with providers that offer cross-border payments that enable CRS to arrive to a place where we have no operational presence and be able to carry out a cash response immediately after a disaster. There's some positives and negatives. First, it's very expensive. The costs for setting up, maintaining, and using these global providers or these cross-border providers is expensive. So that the question about, in terms of cost efficiency, a local provider, a local financial service provider will always be better. However, the time it takes to set those contracts with a local provider is extensive, can be months, 6 months. I've seen some that last up to a year. So the question is, how much are we willing to sacrifice and be able to respond to the need that we see on the ground? So in CRS, we believe that the cost associated to using these global providers, these cross-border payments, weighs the sacrifice, the need to respond. The pro about this is that it really enables CRS to be able to respond anywhere around the world immediately after a crisis. Our goal is to be on the ground and being able to provide assistance with in-kind or cash, dependent on the response analysis, but be able to respond within 2 weeks, ideally within 72 hours. And this is what we're working on as a team. And that's over. Over to you, Lynn.
Great, thank you very much, Alan. I think you highlighted some key ways of working in terms of partnership, collaboration, and preparedness that we're finding very relevant globally. I think really important also to highlight that trade-off between speed and cost as well, and to take into consideration. Now, if I may turn it over to Justin Colberg from Mercy Corps Haiti, who will talk us through some of the experiences of the Haiti Cash Working Group on coordination, one of our favorite topics.
Thanks, Lynn. So for Haiti Coordination, there are 3 points that I think really reinforced coordination over the past 2 hurricane seasons, as well as some other points that I think that the Cash Working Group can move forward with. First of all, to provide some background, the Cash Working Group consists of upwards of 20 different INGOs and Haitian NGOs, with World Food Program and Mercy Corps as the co-leads, with regular participation from the Civil Protection Department with the government. So the first thing that I think that was key to the success of the Cash Working Group in Haiti over the past 2 years has really been the donor buy-in. We had support from ECHO and OFDA funding studies for the Cash Working Group, but also support from both of those donors in that they were attending regularly Cash Working Group meetings in country. And Food for Peace also attended. And just having those donors around the table helps them to better understand the challenges that we're facing in country, helps them also to know in what ways they might be able to support. And so that financial implication, but also just the presence, really enriched the discussion around the Cash Working Group. The second point that I wanted to bring up that was key to success in Haiti was we developed an annual roadmap based on institutional weaknesses that we'd identified based on previous experience with the cash response. So some of you have probably read the Moving Forward report that was written by the Cash Working Group, which reviewed 50 plus documents from cash responses in the history of Haiti since the 2010 earthquake, but really honed in on 17 program reports that had been written since Hurricane Matthew. Using that, we were able to identify consistent challenges in cash capacity in country. And based on our discussions around those challenges in cash capacity, we were able to build out a roadmap that was quite practical in terms of going back to Alan's point. it wasn't necessarily about awareness raising. It was around, we need more clarity around the minimum expenditure basket. We need to better the environment of financial service providers. We need more lessons learned around community accountability mechanisms. So the identification of those issues really led us to success, because we were able to take on these really practical chunks of work and farm them out to different members of the cash working group that had expertise that they could bring to addressing those problems. The third point that I think was quite strong in the cash working group over the past 2 years in Haiti was we did involve quite a wide variety of actors. And the way that we did that was through proactive outreach. It wasn't just by sending emails from the cash working group, hey, the next meeting is this month. We had funding from ECHO and then from OFDA to go out into the different departments of Haiti, conduct CaLP fundamentals training face-to-face that was subsidized for local NGOs. So local NGOs were able to demystify, what is the cash working group about, while we were taking them through the steps of cash implementation. This resulted in really significant participation from local NGOs. We also proactively reached out to financial service providers through capacity assessments of those financial service providers, asking them information about partnership around their cost structures, around network coverage, and around cash out agent capacities. So those 3 points really contributed to the success of the cash working group here in Haiti. It's kind of, it's always a process of continually improving. And so, what we're really trying to focus on this year, first is making sure that all of these different learning documents are readily available and synthesized in a way that INGOs that are new to the cash scene in Haiti, or Haitian NGOs that are new to the cash scene, can take from the lessons that we've learned over the past few years and really jump headfirst into cash implementation with the necessary resources. So making sure that you have those documents together, that they're readily available, and you're able to publicize those, put those on the CaLP website, put those on the local cash working group website. That's really important as far as sharing information. And then the second piece is we want to better understand the incentive structures of the private sector. Financial service providers present a lot of opportunities for delivering cash interventions in Haiti. And we want to make sure that cash actors are seeing all of those opportunities, whether it be medium-term cash programs linking to financial inclusion, whether it be innovative payment mechanisms. We want to make sure that we better understand which financial service providers are poised to offer those services to us, and that we're taking advantage of those. So we've learned a lot over the past 2 years. And I think that with those 2 points, that's where we can be growing in the next 2. Thanks, Lynn.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Justin. I think highlighting the aspect of buy-in and dedicated resources for coordination really demonstrated tangibly all the different things a cash working group can do, something that CaLP frequently advocates for. Great. Thank you. And then next, we'll turn it over to Sarah Bailey, who will talk to us a bit more about shock responsive social protection. Sarah, over to you.
Hi, greetings everyone, and welcome to my kitchen. So I am with the WFP Office for Caribbean Emergency Preparedness and Response. And, it's really a pleasure to be here today to talk about, these important issues related to cash transfers and also shock responsive social protection, which is something that's really at the heart of our work here in the Caribbean. So our office was created in 2018 following WFP's responses to Hurricanes Irma and Maria. And we cover the English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean, so 22 countries and territories. And we work in very close partnership with CDEMA, and most recently supported the government of the Bahamas, working with CDEMA as well in response to Hurricane Dorian. So that's just a bit of a background. And being a new office is provided, in a sense, a unique blank slate about how WFP is approaching its work, including on the use of cash transfers. And while we work on supply chain management and logistics capacity strengthening, much of our work is on shock responsive social protection, or just, however we call it, that general intersection between, social protection on the one hand and, an emergency response and disaster risk management on the other. So I just wanted to briefly highlight where we see some of the opportunities and linkages, for linking and utilizing social protection in response to, to emergencies in the Caribbean. And this is drawing from some regional research that we've been undertaking for the last year and a half on shock responsive social protection, doing case studies and a literature review. And we can post the link to those resources in the chat. So if we step back and think about, well, why are we talking about social protection? It's obviously coming up a lot. And a lot of the, some of the previous speakers really highlighted that. And that's because there are some opportunities to utilize social protection programs, and not just the programs, but some of the systems that are underneath them. So, the data systems or the payment systems to reach people impacted by disasters and other emergencies with cash transfers, assistance, and also with vouchers. So some of these examples were highlighted. I think there's two that often come to mind, with the Red Cross and CRS working with the Ministry of Health and Social Development in the British Virgin Islands related to the provision of cash transfers, and some of whom, we're really lucky to have on this webinar. WFP and UNICEF also supported the government of Dominica following Hurricane Maria to provide cash transfers through the public assistance program. But what I think is interesting is while those examples come up, there are many more in response to emergencies and disasters in the Caribbean that are perhaps discussed less because it was, governments doing these independently without involvement or support of aid agencies. And, we tend to do a lot of documentation of our own responses. And as a result, there's perhaps a little bit less evidence out there on these government-led ones. So there are examples going back over 15 years from Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Bahamas, St. Lucia, and Grenada, just to name a few, where you saw that, the ways that social protection can be used. Sometimes there was an increase in benefits to existing beneficiaries. Other times there was a widening out, to bring on new people or perhaps a little bit of both. And also sometimes entirely new programs were created to be able to meet the needs that were coming up. And while these were kind of building on underlying systems, it wasn't using an existing program. And right now, as was really highlighted in the introduction to the meeting, the use of social protection in response to shocks is being just entirely transformed in response to COVID-19. And WFP, we've been tracking some of the social protection measures. There's also, a fantastic global report that Ugo Gentilini and his colleagues put out on almost a weekly basis for the global measures. But we've tallied 57 measures in the Caribbean taken by at least 17 countries that have been introduced or announced. And there's too many countries to name, from Anguilla to Belize to St. Martin, and the list goes on. And we have a dashboard that includes these measures, and we can share the link in the chat. And, as we're kind of having this discussion and thinking, hurricane preparedness is on all of our minds with that season absolutely, around the corner. And what I think the current experiences or the recent experiences with social protection show is that we need to really broaden how we think about preparedness for cash transfers and for hurricanes, that it's not just about how individual agencies are prepared to respond, but how social protection programs and the systems that are part of them are prepared to respond. And that doesn't mean that every time social protection is the way to go, and that doesn't mean that there's not people outside of social protection programs, or data systems that need to be brought on. It just means that where these opportunities exist, and we know they exist because we've seen them, there are some real opportunities to be better prepared to do them, because a common thread of all these examples is, through much creativity and necessity, they were created after the fact. So, imagine the power of investing in the preparedness to do them beforehand. Bringing that to a close, I think what was also mentioned was that COVID-19 is, while incredibly challenging, the huge use of social protection in response is also an opportunity, to formalize and institutionalize and prepare for how social protection programs can be used or are being used really in response to shocks, including ones that, are going to come in the future. And that's a key priority, I think, for WFP and many of our UN agency colleagues. And so WFP is in support of CDEMA and working with CDEMA, going to develop a training on shock responsive social protection and learning events. And this is complementing support from CaLP and by UNICEF, where, you know, I think just a key priority is working with governments to be able to, you know, have that better preparedness base through having this institutionalized processes around the use of social protection. And so I think there's going to be a lot that's going to be coming out soon. You know, documenting and learning from everything that's happening is crucially important. There's other programs in the region, such as a UN joint program that WFP and UNICEF are co-leading on adaptive social protection. And so I think if we look broadly at the role of social protection, you know, and the linkages to cash transfers, we also start to see that the amount of experience and also the evidence is actually quite strong. And I don't think evidence is holding us back, though we need to continue to learn from, document, and institutionalize the processes that are underway. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sarah, for your thoughts. And I think highlighting, you know, WFP's kind of systems-based approach in the region is something that we really need to think about globally as well, and something that CaLP is taking into account in its new strategy. So with that, thank you to all the speakers for the remarks. I'm going to turn it over now to Zara to facilitate a discussion among the speakers as well as participants. So over to you, Zara.
Thank you, Lynn. And I'll ask all the speakers to be able to turn their cameras back on, and hopefully the bandwidth will continue to hold for us. Thank you. I also just need to, I mean, I'm looking at the participant list, and I need to just do a very quick shout out to all my colleagues from the British Virgin Islands that are on here. It's great to see everybody here because there's quite a bit to learn from that example. But also just there's a lot of overseas territories, and we tend to get ignored, the overseas territories. It's great to see P.S. Richardson and somebody from DDM, Alvin from DDM as well. So if we have time, I would like to be able to call on people, some of the participants, if we are able to do that. But I think, you know, great to hear Alan starting off with, you know, cash is appropriate. Like, you know, this is not one of the questions that we have to deal with, looking at localization. And we have a couple of questions that have come up around this in terms of, you know, how do we start or, you know, how our local actors how can they be better involved? What can we be looking at with that? Then we had Justin talking about the kinds of outreach that you guys have been doing with the cash working group in Haiti. We have a couple of questions around how to set up a cash working group, what that coordination structure could look like. And ending with Sarah talking about, you know, the importance of being able to support governments and the whole conversation that we're having around COVID, expanding social protection systems, and what all of this can look like. I'm going to start off actually with the coordination question, because we had two different questions. And one was around, you know, what does, one was around how do you set up a cash working group? And this was from Mr. Alwyn. He is working for the Department of Disaster Management in Anguilla. And then we had the other question from, sorry, I'm trying to look at where the questions are because they're coming fast and furious now, which is great. But there was one also from, oh, it says anonymous. And it was a question for Mercy Corps. Is government part of the cash working group? How many local NGOs are part of the cash working group, and, you know, how to increase engagement, etc. I want to open this up first to Justin and then the other panelists to sort of talk about what does a cash working group look like? How do we set it up? What are we looking at? But also there is a difference here in terms of if the humanitarian actor space is setting it up versus how we are making sure it's being coordinated with any government structures around coordination of cash. So Justin, I'm going to go ahead and start with you first.
Thanks, Sarah. So I can't speak from my experience on how to set up a cash working group. One thing to note is that the cash working group sits outside of the clusters and sectors in Haiti. So it really is meant to be a cross-cutting theme that organizations are working on. So whether or not you're a food security implementer, whether or not you're education, water and sanitation, the cash working group in Haiti is meant to add value to those different sectors and does not duplicate their coordination mechanisms. I'm not sure if CaLP has some best practices on how to set up a cash working group, but to get on to the next question, I did answer in the text box around the Haiti specific coordination. So we do depend a lot on the Department of Civil Protection's leadership for the cash working group. This does not mean that they attend all of the meetings. As you know, with many different cash working groups around the world, who attends the meetings really depends on what time of the year it is, what the subject matter of the meeting is, and what types of leadership you need in that group at that time. But we have been coordinating meetings once a month for the outside of hurricane season, and then we also do ad hoc meetings during the hurricane season. And so we see a wide array of kind of your typical INGOs as well as Haitian NGOs participating. We did see a big bump in Haitian NGOs participating once we started facilitating CaLP fundamentals workshops in the different departments.
Brilliant, thank you. Sarah, if you had anything to add to that? No?
No, I'm fine, but I'm happy to take another question coming up.
Sure, great. Is there anybody else who would like to add around Alan? Yes, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, with a focus on emergency response, I think cash working groups are great at solving some of the operational specifics of cash programming, specifically on resolving the transfer value. Just getting agreement between all the cash working group members on the transfer value makes a lot of it frees up a lot of time for programs to focus more on the practicalities of actually how to go about distributing cash and all that. Additionally, it's a great way to identify the most appropriate or best quality financial service provider. And also it's an entryway into collaboration, getting people to come together, organizations to come together and actually do something together. I've had many opportunities to participate in startups of cash working groups, and then later on. For starting up, I find there's two ways to go about it. One is a direction, in my opinion, a direction from clusters or agencies saying we need a cash working group to really operationalize cash. And then the other one is an organic way where international NGOs and local NGOs, kind of people that know each other, come together and say, hey, we need to solve some of these practicalities of how to do cash in this context. Can we come together and start working together? I find that government is very important to get them involved in the cash working group. It's one of the main things, and this to ensure that what you're doing is not crazy, right? That actually the government is on board. But additionally, any links to potential future social protection, linking up with the government agencies, you need to get them involved in the beginning. And I find that in the Caribbean there is a lot of interest from government to participate in these coordination units. So I'm a big fan of them. That's it.
Thank you. And I'm just going to piggyback off of what you have just said, because we have an example from the region in the Bahamas of where it was government was co-leading with an international organization, with the Red Cross movement, in fact, with the Bahamas Red Cross, and supported by IFRC. And it was the Department of Social Services, actually, that was the co-lead for the cash working group. And the terms of reference that was written for the Bahamas Cash Working Group made an explicit reference to having those links to social protection. So it was a joint group, so it wasn't just a humanitarian side or just a government, but they came and sat together in order to have that kind of a cash working group. Alan, since we were on you already, I would like to be able, and in your presentation, you had talked quite a bit about the importance of localization and how CRS has moved their strategy to supporting local partners in the region. And one of the questions that we have is that it would be good to hear a bit more your views of relative strengths of INGO and NGOs with respect to cash voucher assistance, and referencing also the presentation made by CDEMA that we're looking at preparedness. And I love how you did that, Ms. Grosvenor. You started from saying from the local to the national to the regional. So Alan, if we can hear from you a little bit around that, please.
Yeah. So like there's value added from both, in my opinion, from international NGOs and local NGOs. I think that local national NGOs have a better understanding of the realities of the ground, understanding of the beneficiary needs, capacity to link up and scale up in the target areas that are affected quicker than an international NGO that doesn't have presence on the ground. So in my opinion, a natural disaster is not a place for an organization to come in and start operations. Rather, a natural disaster should be one where they have operations ongoing and just scale up in response. So in that regard, I find that local organizations have two really strong positions in regards to CVA. One is the link with beneficiaries, engaging beneficiaries, identifying, selecting, targeting, all that process, all that jazz. And then the other one is the contracting with a financial service provider. I find that they're best placed to quickly contract, identify the most appropriate and feasible financial service provider to respond and provide assistance to the people in need. International NGOs, their strength is on capacity, right? Building capacity. And I feel that an international NGO coming into a country in a state of an emergency, their role to build a local organization's capacity to scale up is huge, right? Building up all the systems that in place for a local NGO to respond instead of to the 100 beneficiaries they're used to, instead to the thousands that they are in need, right? And that scale up requires a big investment of capacity and big investment of resources, time, and potentially the local NGO would be quickly overwhelmed. Getting an international NGO to come in and support these local NGOs to build up to scale up is a huge role, in my opinion. Over.
Great. Thank you. And I'd like to yield the floor. I'm sorry to put you on the spot like this, Ms. Grossler, but there's a lot of the different topics, and you can see the questions that are coming in. So I'd like to be able to invite, the CDEMA perspective on what you're hearing and what you're seeing and the different sorts of involvement we can see.
Thank you. So I will probably just pick up on 2 points specifically. So this is looking at the capacity of a number of the actors who will be coming into the space to provide the service. And I think and the linkage with local government. So I think this is an important and critical point. And it is a point that we recognize even as we look across the Caribbean landscape, is how do you manage this sort of resource capacity along with the issue of authority. So many of the actors who will come in that will bring their expertise to the table, who will bring the resources associated with the program to the table, they will have capacity, they will have the resources, etc. But really within the Caribbean context, the government has the authority. So that connection validates the program. It allows for reach. Many of the countries already have some measure of social protection programs already existing, so it can provide avenues for where you can link with them. There are countries who have an already organized social partnership, which includes many of the actors who may be working in some of these groups related to like a Rotary or a Lions Club or whatever. So these are sometimes already organized groups where there can be potential also entry points. So it could give you a little bit more reach in terms of connecting with the community. So I think that relationship with government becomes critically important, and it's not always, and the report highlighted it, and sometimes in the cash learning program may exist in a country where the government arrangement is not very strong. But within the Caribbean, it is more stable politically, etc. And so it can be an important entry point and connection for you. The second issue that I want to highlight, we haven't specifically talked about it here, but this whole matter of the beneficiaries. And Traditionally, the cash learning or the cash related cash and voucher assistance programs tend to target the most vulnerable, or those who may be below the poverty line. And within the context of what we're working on, the Caribbean and resilience, we recognize it's not just about the most vulnerable, but it's also about the marginal, because we recognize that there are many persons within our societies that they cannot withstand any external shocks. And if you look at a number of studies that have been done by ECLAC, many of those studies show that many of those persons who have been impacted by the hurricanes are actually pushed below the poverty line based on the impacts. So it is very important as well too that there be an important grouping of persons that we target also in terms of this assistance. And where there is some data available, the connection with government might also help us to identify those persons more readily.
Ms. Grosvenor, and for everybody else, first of all, thank you for that, for those inputs. And one of the big things that was coming up in the report, and we're seeing it as well in the question answer, and I would like your response first, and it's probably the last one we can get into, is, when talking about beneficiaries or people who are affected, and who government can actually work with, or perhaps not work with, and because there are groups that get left out. This is something across the board that this has been a problem. One of the added values, and this has been put inside the report because we heard this from the different key informants and from the literature, is perhaps there's a role there for INGOs or NGOs to be supporting those populations that government cannot be assisting. So I think as a last sort of interjection, we can look at, hearing from you first and then from the other speakers, if there are thoughts and comments around this issue, which a lot of times is a little bit contentious in country. Over to you, ma'am.
So let me just quickly say yes. And I also see there are other points that are being raised in the questions about the whole issue of neutrality and whether or not, this is, working through government allows us to do that. I will say I understand those issues, and these are some of the realities. So yes, there is a role for about a number of actors, NGOs, etc., to be able to address sectors or groups that the government may not be actually able to undertake. And we know that we have recent examples. So yes, there's a role for them to play. But may I also say that at the end of the day, a government has a responsibility for every single citizen in its country. Every single one. And therefore, once I understand the whole issues of neutrality, my thinking is that we are also responsible for holding governments accountable. Because if they're only doing what they should do when we are in the space, it means therefore that when we leave the space, they will do what they want to do. So I would say that we have a role as well to play in how do we keep the systems accountable, so that whether we are in the space or not in the space, that they can also abide by certain principles that allow them to serve all of their citizens. Because I think that, I think at the heart of it, that is something that we want to do and that we ought to do, and the systems can help us do it better. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and all citizens. This is always a contentious point, but I invite the other speakers, and I'm just going to call on.
Noted on the citizens, I should say residents. Because you're right, citizens is also something, but whether there are residents or even whether they're guests, so all who are there at the time, government has a responsibility for.
Thank you. And it's good to have that statement being said out loud. I'm looking at the other speakers for their microphones to unmute so that I can call on Sarah.
And I'll keep it quick. I know we're drawing to a close. Those were just great interventions. And I think, just to add that, the issue of humanitarian principles has been, a fruitful and important and hugely important discussion within humanitarian action. But I think we can have principled humanitarian actions in support of governments. And also, every situation is different. Every island is different. The Caribbean is extremely diverse. But a lot of the coordination issues that are raised on, a lot of this, when we look at government-led responses and how we can coordinate with and be supportive of governments to be able to reach people. and be mindful of those who are in and outside of certain, programs or systems, then I think we can, let principles guide us and not necessarily be a barrier to principled engagement and supporting governments. So that's in supporting governments to, ultimately, of course, with the aim of, how we all can reach those who are impacted and at risk. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. Justin or Alan? This is your last sort of, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to make a pitch and point back to the CaLP resources that are online. A lot of the, I mean, going back to what Alan said about international NGOs providing capacity, a lot of the questions that we ask ourselves at the beginning of a cash response is, okay, well, we know that data protection is important, but what does this look like? And what are the key questions I should be asking myself? And, going onto the CaLP website, like you can immediately see like their data protection principles. And those are the conversations that you can build off of with your government counterparts. And so, when we're talking about bringing in, capacity, referring to those guidelines, understanding that those guidelines were built off of past successes and failures. I think it's, if you have questions, the first place that we always go to look at is the CaLP website, because they are capturing a lot of that learning that's been being done, not only in the region, but globally.
Thank you. Alan?
No comment other than what's already been said. Great.
Okay, brilliant. And with that, thank you from my side to all the speakers, all the attendees for the brilliant questions that have been coming in. And I'm going to go ahead and hand over to Lynn because we're already 2 minutes over time. Lynn?
Great, thank you all for joining us today. And we realized, I think we probably need more time for conversation because there's a lot out there. Just as we wrap up, if we could show the last slide, and we also have a final poll for you. We do intend to continue having the supporting learning and sharing of exchanges, so we'd love to hear more from you. So we have a couple questions. So first, as your organization engages in preparedness activities in the Caribbean, we'd like to hear from you. Which actors are you missing and are you prioritizing to be involved? So if you could choose up to 3. And then secondly, to inform our next steps, we'd like to hear what are your top 3 learning priorities to improve the quality of CVA delivery in the Caribbean. And that will help us think of future webinars or discussions or even research projects we might undertake in this area. And with that, I just wanted to also flag that the final report is available online, and also it will be translated as well into Spanish and French soon, so please stay tuned. We also have the CaLP's discussion groups where you can ask questions, and this is an online forum. You need to register. You can get approved quickly to ask some of these questions. And we realize also that there were a few questions that we didn't get to, so we will aim to revert through the D groups and through the participant list. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, a huge thanks to all of our wonderful speakers. I think, and we look forward to hearing your feedback on the report. I've shared the context for myself and my colleague Jenny Tro. If you have any comments on the report, they'd be very welcome. And with that, thank you very much, and I wish you all a good rest of the week. The recording will also be shared soon. Okay, take care.